This is CB Up for Discussion, a podcast series from Community Business where we tackle DE&I and wellbeing hot topics with special guests from across Asia.
Hi, my name is Janet Ledger, CEO at Community Business, and I will be your podcast host for today's episode. Mary Frances Winters is the author of 7 books, including Racial Justice at Work, Practical Solutions for Systemic Change, and bestsellers Black Fatigue, How Racism Erodes the Mind, Body and Spirits, and We Can't Talk About That at Work, How to Talk About Race, Religion, Politics, and Other Polarizing Topics. She is the founder and CEO of the Winters Group, Inc., a global diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice consulting firm. She came of age during the civil rights movement of the 1960s and is a passionate advocate for justice and equity. Named a top 10 diversity and inclusion trailblazer by Forbes, Mary Frances believes in opening doors and amplifying marginalised voices and their allies. So Mary Frances, thank you so much for joining us today, and it's absolutely wonderful to have you back as a collaborator with us here at Community Business. I wanted to just start by saying, how are you? Especially in the face of what's happening in the US post the executive orders and the backlash.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and it is good to be back connected to Community Business. It's been a while, but I fondly remember my trips to Hong Kong and to Singapore and to India on behalf of Community Business. So yeah, so those were some very nice trips and very nice sessions that I did. But yeah, it's a really, really difficult time. How am I doing? I live part-time in Barbados, so I'm in Barbados right now, where it's beautiful every day. The sun shines and the ocean is blue, and I try to take care of my well-being because there's certain things we just can't do anything about, and we have to recognize that. And I know that good will prevail in the end. The diversity, equity, inclusion is about harmony, is about bringing people together. So we know the people who do this work understand that it is not divisive, it is not polarizing. It really is about helping us to understand each other so that we can live and work better together. So I'm always optimistic. I'm an eternal optimist.
Oh, it's good to hear. I think we're all feeling it, and certainly everybody that we're working with is feeling it. And you're right. Like when you know that you're working on something that's fair and is about inclusion and belonging for everybody, it's just holding the course, and it isn't divisive. So yeah. So look, for listeners who might not be fully aware, can you briefly describe what the backlash is entailing, and what are some of the common criticisms or arguments that are currently being made in the US against diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So this is my perspective, and I recognize the limitations of my own lens. So for the your followers and listeners, this is my perspective. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is under attack because there's a sense that it gives preferential treatment unfairly to certain groups. So as you well know, and your listeners will well know, the history, around the world, but particularly in the United States, we've had a sordid history around exclusion, where it was legal before the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in the United States. It was legal to exclude people. You could discriminate legally. And, we had Jim Crow laws, we had separations where Black people couldn't sit in the same place in the movie theaters or drink at the same water fountains. Protections for women. Women were excluded from certain roles, certain positions. They couldn't be on the police force, and all of those kinds of things changed with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. To level the playing field and to correct the past. That's what the affirmative action, was about. It was to say, and we haven't gotten there yet. So when you do audits and you look at statistics and you say, wow, are we at parity? Does everybody have a fair chance of achieving their full potential? And the answer is no, we still are not there. However, the sense is that the programs designed to level the playing field give an unfair advantage to certain groups. And here's the big piece of it, and those individuals from those groups are less qualified. So that's the argument that's being made. And therefore, white men, white heterosexual men, are being discriminated against, and they call it reverse discrimination. In my way of thinking, there is no such thing as reverse discrimination. Discrimination is discrimination, right? And so because inclusion includes everyone, if you're discriminating against a white male, then that's wrong as well. White males are protected because they're veterans, because they're we have protections around family leave now for both men and women, where before it was just women. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is for everyone, but the mindset of the current administration in the United States is that it is not, and that it unfairly disadvantages white men.
Yeah, I mean, that's a message we've been pushing as much as we can. Sitting where we are in Asia around, let's not get lost in the rhetoric here that it is for all. That's what we're talking about. It isn't just for the specific groups. If we think about what can we do about the backlash, because I know within our network at the moment, there's a lot of reflection going on around like, what can we do about the backlash and how do we resist it? So, just sort of, it'd be nice to dig a bit deeper into maybe some of the common misconceptions or misunderstandings that you're seeing about DE&I, and then how we might address that.
Well, the common misunderstanding is that DEI was really for, in the United States, race is still, the big bugaboo, if you will, and that this disadvantaged unfairly Black people in particular. Also the other area is the LGBTQ community. So it seems that those are two targeted groups, two targeted areas that the administration is after. And then the third group is women, women as well, because if you dismantle, so we have protected groups. There are certain groups that were protected by law from discrimination because of past discrimination. And the idea is, the feeling is that they went too far. They went too far in the correction. But if you look at the data and you look at the statistics, white men still predominate, in all leadership roles. And people of color, women, people who in the United States, the categories would be, Black, Latino, Asian, Hawaiian, and I know that I'm forgetting a group, multiracial, multiracial people who are protected by the laws. And the idea is that there are things like unconscious bias that, so why are the statistics as they are? Why is it that we're not at parity? Why is it that these groups continue to be less represented than their availability in the labor force? Why is that the case? And so we're saying, people who advocate for diversity and inclusion, is because there are unconscious and sometimes conscious, biases. But when we think about it, let's even think about neurodiversity. So neurodiversity is one of the newer aspects. So if someone is in the workplace and they're dyslexic, and the leader doesn't know that, the leader could make judgments about that individual that could be, quite wrong. And if some accommodation were made, perhaps, providing Grammarly or some other, software that's so readily available today, this individual, would be a stellar, performer. And so when we think about this, we're not just talking about race, we're not just talking about, gender, we're not just talking about LGBTQ, we're talking about how do we create environments where everyone is able to thrive. And so in leadership development, if leaders don't recognize that there are differences that make a difference, it doesn't necessarily mean that when you see someone not performing well, that there is some difference that's making a difference. But if the leader can't even put that in their options of what might be going on, then they're not going to go there as a possibility. And so what our work does, from my perspective, it opens up the possibilities of the range of obstacles that could be, possible, precluding, that's keeping a person from, achieving what they might be able to achieve. It helps the leaders to ask the question, was it because of Mary Frances's race that I thought that? Does that coming into play at all? Was it because she was a woman? I had a leader one time, this is a number of years ago, say he had an aha moment in a session, and he said, oh my goodness, he said, I have daughters, and he said, and they're of childbearing age, and he said, I now realize that the women on my team, I don't think of them for international assignments because I'm just assuming that they wouldn't want them, because they're married and they're thinking about having a family. And he said, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that that's what I was thinking, but I was thinking of my own daughters and what I would want for them. So it's not that we're saying that leaders discriminate purposely. We're not saying that they're bad people. We're just saying that there are differences that make a difference. And diversity, equity, and inclusion allows us to take into account those differences. Now, might there be abuse of some of these? Of course, there's always some abuse, right? But by and large, diversity, equity, inclusion is about leveling the playing field and about giving everybody a fair chance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I don't think you can have, there's a lot of talk about meritocracy, and I don't think you can achieve that unless you are taking the lens of inclusion.
Right.
So it's just to me, you can't have one without the other.
Well, and who decides merit? I mean, how do we assess? How does one assess merit, right? And so if you look at the qualifications of this individual and you look at the qualifications of the next individual, and their qualifications are the same, right? Who's to say that one is not more worthy than the other? I mean, it's such hypocrisy right now in the United States, though, because the people that Donald Trump has put in his cabinet, many of them have no qualifications for the job that that they're doing. And so when you start to talk about merit, it just falls apart, because how do you define merit? Right? That means who's deserving, right?
Yeah.
And if I have if I've got all the schooling and the education and whatnot, why am I not just as deserving?
Absolutely. So, and I mean, we've been doing a lot of reflection as well around how you appeal to those who are sort of in the majority, depending on where you're actually sitting. So, in your book, in Inclusive Conversations, you talk about the fragility of dominant groups, which I think we're sort of seeing in, I mean, we see it here in the region that we're in. So how do can you sort of give us your perspective on how you reach out across the divide to start to work with the dominant groups to get buy-in?
I guess we just have to keep the message going that this is about all of us, and to show how those dominant groups are benefiting from diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. When you when you talk about unions, when you talk about, family leave, there are so many there are so many benefits and so many aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion beyond hiring, right? Beyond who gets the job, so that we're all benefiting. So there was a situation. I'm on the board of my alma mater, and they were talking about a program for the deaf and hard of hearing that has been canceled because of Trump's executive orders. And this program was a supportive program that allowed students who were deaf and hard of hearing, it gave them the assistance that they needed. But because it's under DEI, the program has been eliminated. And so I think we have to just continue the message that DEI, because diversity just is. I mean, we can't legislate diversity away because it just is. It just is. We come in all different sizes, shapes, colors, ages, abilities. It just is. So diversity just is. So how do you manage it? How do you leverage it in an organization to get peak performance? And it's by understanding it, right? It's by really understanding it. And so I think that this notion comes from the idea that there's this great replacement theory. So the global majority is not white. And I think that therein lies, I'm being very candid here because I think we have to have candid conversations. And when you think about the global majority is people from all parts of the world and not white necessarily. So I think that that's the issue that we all know this, the type of mentality that says the white race is the superior race. And so I think that's underneath it all. I think that's and that's a global issue, and I think that's why the current administration in the United States is aligning themselves with like-minded leaders.
Yeah, because I think that I think by and large, the majority won't necessarily. Most people are fair-minded, like there's not a if presented with logic, I think the majority of people are sort of fair-minded, but they might not. I think it's sometimes how things are described, and some of the sorts of examples I think of my work career was working mainly with men and mainly with white men. And in terms of inclusion, allowing surfacing the stories and getting them to be comfortable with taking up things like family leave and flexible working and, to play the role of fathers, to be more active in that. And I'm talking a decade ago, and I used to sort of see fear in a lot of the men, in that it was seen as weakness for them to embrace those sorts of things. Like when they knew that it was safe for them to do so, because I was going to be non-judgmental, if anything, the opposite, supportive of that. And slowly but surely you'd see more of them kind of coming out and availing themselves of that. But yeah, it's very disappointing to watch. It's very frustrating to watch. And, we in Asia, what we're also seeing is there are some sides of the political spectrum here that are embracing some of what we're seeing as well as a majority. Sort of seeing it as talking about inclusion very much as a negative. So we're really keen on how we just continue to engage, explain, educate, all those sorts of things. And one of the things we're also seeing here is whether it's on LinkedIn or in person, and this is way before, this is probably last year we were seeing this more so, and it's not necessarily attached to what's changed, but we've seen it's really created an echo chamber of voices rather than cross-communication perspectives. So, it's the same people in the same rooms talking to almost like a closed audience. So I guess what's your perspective on how we try to bring a broader audience into the conversation?
Well, I think right now there's just a lot of fear to speak up about anything. And so I don't know that I have a solution like for right now. Right now, I think those individuals who are fair-minded, and I agree with you that I think the majority of people are fair-minded, but they're fair-minded with a bit of fear. And if I speak on this, am I going to be targeted in some way? And so I think that we have to be gentle in a way with people, and recognize that the fear is the fear is real. The fear is real. I think forums like this where we're openly talking about it. We just did a 3-session series on the book. We can't talk about that at work. We focused it on how do you have the conversations in this climate, in this climate. And so the first part was really about the I in inclusion and managing the I in inclusion, because people are coming with all sorts of different emotions right now. There's frustration, there's anger, there's fear, there's stress, there's just all sorts of different emotions right now. And to recognize that and acknowledge that and do the self-work to say, where am I? What am I going to stand for? What am I willing to take a risk on? Because it's just, I just can't do anything else. I must speak up on this. I must stand for this. Everybody's not going to march and protest. Everybody's not going to write, like I do, but what role can you play that allows you to be a part of the movement towards a notion of a kinder world, a more empathetic world, a more compassionate world, because to me, that's what diversity, equity, and inclusion is all about. It's about caring about humanity. It's about caring about individuals who are a part of this planet, so that we can all cohabitate it in a way that we're not fighting and fighting. And so I think it's one person at a time. I think it's one, but I think right now people are paralyzed. I think now people need to take care of themselves, whatever that their well-being, because we're compounding things. Janet, like, think about it. You may have an elderly parent that you're caring for. You may have, children who are, have special needs, and you've got the political climate as well, right? And so I think right now that people are just carrying huge, heavy burdens. My colleague, well, some of my colleagues have been fired, from their diversity jobs. And then others don't know if they will be fired from their diversity job. And if you work in the federal government in the United States right now, maybe you have a job today, you didn't have it tomorrow, and now they got it back again. And, there's just so much. And that's really, really difficult when you're toying with people's livelihood. So I think right now, and I was not one to agree with changing the language. I now understand, why we have to, for now, we have to do that, but we still have to do the work. We still have to do the work of caring for people. This is about the human experience. This is about, people being able to live their lives, have their livelihoods, and do it with respect and dignity. That's what it's really all about.
Yeah.
Because no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's just you're absolutely right. I think one of our last sort of, or one of the last comments we sent out was about, let's not forget the humans that are impacted in this. It's while the debate's raging. Right. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah. It's a lot. We're having our summit next week, and we've got a whole wellness corner. We're just really focusing on people taking care, of their own well-being. I believe good will prevail in the end. I believe people will not want to have this divisive, polarizing kind of environment. But while we're in it, it's just really difficult. And like I said to you before we started recording, you asked me how I'm doing. I'm doing, but I really try to not look at a lot of I'm not a news junkie anymore. I don't watch a lot of it. And I really try to read books that are affirming And I think that that's what, for right now, we're in a moment. Hopefully this is not a movement. Hopefully this is just a moment where
Yeah.
things are just really in an upheaval.
And,
Right.
the companies they're working with are, they're all internally dealing with what this means
Mhm.
in terms of what they can do around the backlash. But have you seen anything? What are you seeing in terms of innovation or a shift? Because you touched there on changing the
Mm.
language. Like, what are
Yeah.
you seeing organisations doing that are choosing to hold the course in advancing inclusion in the face of
Right.
what we're in at the
Yeah.
moment?
So one of my clients is using the term impact officer. So the
Okay.
person who was the diversity person is now the impact officer,
Mm,
impact. And it's impact both internally and externally. So she now has philanthropy under her as well. What
mm,
impact are we having? I'm going to be speaking in Minnesota in May, and they're using terms like fairness and opportunity.
mm,
Um, and I know that I think it was JP Morgan has changed theirs from equity to opportunity.
mm,
So how are we providing, equal opportunity, equitable opportunity? So
mm,
they're using that language. Seeing organizations, we've been saying this for years, but seeing organizations paying more attention to integrating this work into the entire business rather than having it as a separate. But we've been saying
mm.
to do that for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not a new concept, but I think now they're implementing that,
Mm,
so that it's integrated. We're working with a client where at the manufacturing client, and they just had a lot of issues with trust and just a lot of toxic environment. And
mm,
some of it did have to do with racial diversity. However, we're not doing the work under that umbrella. We're doing the work under organizational change, and we're
mm.
looking at safety, physical safety, because they're in a manufacturing environment, as well as psychological safety. So we
Okay.
put those two together, and within that, how do we have all employees feel psychologically safe, regardless of what their race is? And so we're finding and we're helping organizations to implement in earnest this time,
Mm.
integrating this work into all of their operations.
Yeah. I've always been a firm believer in that. And I think
Mhm.
I think it's the way that I came to community business was from being an operational leader. So,
Mhm.
and working for a company that had fantastic policies and practices and being able to
Mhm.
embrace those and implement them.
Right.
Because I think the real change happens at that middle
Mhm.
layer of the organization. And if those leaders aren't equipped to and you're right. I mean, it's you touched on it earlier on around the biases that they come with. They're inherently not bad people, but they're
Right.
coming with their own sort
Right.
of
Yeah.
worldview, and that might not, it's yeah. So, and no, it's interesting because we're seeing clients shift keep doing the work, but shift the work into different parts of the organization. Some of it in around CSR in the
Mhm.
CSR groups, which is interesting because that's actually where it sits in a lot of the Hong Kong businesses.
Mhm.
So, like they've sort of come at it from that perspective first, even though we know that,
That's under attack in the United States as well. The
right, okay,
CSR
that's
work.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
they've kind of shifted that language over the past few years to ESG,
Mm, yeah,
environment, social, and governance. Yeah. So the
yeah,
ESG is under attack as well.
right, okay, yeah. So, and we're finding one thing as well that the social mobility research that we've done has been quite
Mhm.
timely because we're finding a broader audience is wanting to engage with that
Mhm.
than we've and I think it's because most people, even those that are potentially more right leaning, can understand a social mobility story.
Mhm.
So
Right.
that's helping. Yeah, so just you have given some advice through the conversation that we're having, but the final question here is around, for those who are working in diversity, equity, and inclusion roles that are affected, or are
Mhm.
discouraged, What's your advice to them to not become completely overwhelmed in this challenging environment that we're in?
Yeah, I think that, number one, taking care of them, taking care of ourselves, and recognizing that this too will pass. But I also think reimagining what that role might look like. Reimagining it around the idea of the human experience or the employee experience. If they're in a corporation, what is the overall employee experience? All employees, what is the experience? The other area, and I wrote a piece about this in our Inclusion Solution blog and newsletter, is retooling around artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is very fast moving technology, as we all know. And generative AI with chat, GPT and Gemini and all of the other Gen AI tools is really taking over rapidly. And from the books that I'm reading, they're not always taking into account the human experience or the human aspect of it. Some of the authors that I'm reading says, well, we can do this, but the question is, should we do this? What are the ethics of it? What about the privacy? And what about the biases that are inherent? How is the data collected? Where does the data come from? And how are you training? How are you training the AI tools? And if it's being trained from the mindset of the dominant group, then what are we missing? So I think that there's opportunity for people, EI, to sit at those tables with the technologists, to be part of the team, to be able to bring that human factor in. So I'm encouraging people who are being displaced to tool up and to skill up around artificial intelligence.
Okay. And then, as you said as well, the self-care elements, I think, are this is very, very sound advice in that we're in. But so thank you so much. It's just been a really wonderful conversation. I know that it's something that our listeners are going to be really keen to hear, your perspectives, but thanks so much for joining us today. It's been fantastic.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to CB Up for Discussion. For more information about our work across Asia, head to the Community Business website.